It wasn't until the Second War started in Iraq, the urban guerrilla war with close combat against invisible enemies, the kind of fighting that is high stress, that the army started to notice major psychological problems among its soldiers. The military used to ignore those problems, but what's different about this war is that the army is now taking them seriously, sending a special team, dubbed the Brain Rangers, right to the front lines.
Never before in the history of warfare has there been such a coordinated and detailed effort at mitigating the effects of warfare on service members.
Major Jeffrey Grammer is part of the Army's new mental health offensive. He's a psychiatrist with the combat stress team.
A lot of people think, gee, there's something wrong with me. And you say, hey, this is part of combat, and this gets better. And they go, phew, I thought I was going crazy.
What Grammer likes to tell soldiers is that they aren't going crazy. They're just having a normal reaction to a very crazy situation.
Hey, I'm hit, man. Get back in the fight.
Where the enemy is invisible but can strike at any time. Where ordinary objects like cars and roadside debris explode with no warning. And where insurgents are dressed like civilians but are lethal combatants.
Company.
But what's really new about the Army's combat stress program is that therapists don't wait for the patients to walk in. They go out to the battlefield to look for them.
Hi, Major Grammer, combat stress.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Well, we will take a team of folks, including psychiatrists, psychologists, the whole gamut, and we will go to these remote areas where soldiers are and try to get to frontline troops.
Captain Johnson, this is Major Grammer. We're the,
Hi, how you doing? There's no credibility to sit back in a walled-off compound with concertina wire saying, let me tell you about combat stress. Any questions?
I
have to bring the care to them, and I have to show willingness to go where they are, to walk a foot, not a mile, but just a foot in their shoes, because what they go through is absolutely tremendously difficult.
Few frontline bases have been as dangerous and stressful as the 1st Cavalry Divisions in Sadr City, Baghdad. Shortly before our visit, a Humvee leaving the camp was ripped apart by a roadside bomb, and 3 soldiers were killed.
Personally, I felt a lot of guilt for what happened.
Lieutenant Derek Druin was leading the convoy.
The guilt was I had just cleared that route, that section of the route, no more than 5 minutes before.
Captain Pinter, the company commander, and Specialists Moreno and Uyghur were all killed.
Those guys were some of the best soldiers I've ever worked with, and I'm deeply sorry. What has happened, happened, and that if there was anything I could have done different to change the outcome, I'd do it in an instant.
When you're 20 years old, your friends aren't supposed to die.
He's gone.
You have folks trying to say, well, hey, I lived. These other folks didn't. Why was that?
Survivor's guilt.
That would be survivor's guilt. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense who lives or dies. And part of our job is to help people negotiate that in a way that allows it to sit with them.
All those who survived the attack on the Army convoy were called together for a no-holds-barred discussion of what happened.
How you guys doing?
That's now offered by the combat stress team every time soldiers are killed in action.
Rather than me standing up and saying, here's what you should feel, I'm letting group members talk about how they're feeling and just reaffirming that, hey, look, you're all feeling this way. This is what happens when you have something traumatic like this happen in your life.
It was good for me because it allowed me to finally get out my guilt and my anger to what happened. And without it, I probably wouldn't be sleeping as well at night. There's still nights where I lie awake and think about what happened, but it definitely helped.
The combat stress team also helped Sergeant Jerry Burge.
They weren't afraid to hear what we had to say.
you know, pulled us all together that night and just let it out. Whether it was good or bad, they didn't care. They just wanted to let it out.
But weeks later, he was still having a hard time accepting the death of his friend.
Some people say, you know, how did you deal with it? And I tell them that I didn't deal with it, I'm still dealing with it. I mean, it's something that I haven't gotten over yet. I mean, yeah, he was a friend of mine, and it's not something you expect when you get out of a vehicle to go help out your friend, and you see that. You see what's left. That's an image there that I'll never get rid of.
The Army has been taking a serious look at what combat stress is doing to its soldiers. It conducted a survey for the first time in its history in an active war zone. Half the soldiers complained of low morale. 17% were found to be suffering from traumatic stress, anxiety or depression. And only a third of those who wanted help actually got it. The soldiers said that they either didn't know about or couldn't get to help from the battlefield. They also said that they were afraid of the stigma attached to seeking such help. That's what the Combat Stress Control Team is trying to correct.
Traditionally, the Army is not a touchy-feely organization. It has put a pretty significant amount of resources into this.
Lieutenant Colonel Bob Gerhardt is a frontline battalion surgeon who has sent many soldiers to the combat stress teams.
It's an entree for somebody. You know, these guys are pretty nice. They're human. They're real. You know, they're not wanting to get into my head with a screwdriver. Maybe I'll go talk to them.
And in Iraq, there's plenty to talk about because there is no escape from stress, not even back at base.
6, 7, we're clear on this roof.
You go out to a forward aid station and you expect to get shot at, you know, and somebody shoots at you and you shoot back and you defend yourself, and that's okay, you deal with it. But you get back and now you're back at camp. You know, you get a shower, you sleep, go get a meal, and all of a sudden, boom, this comes out of nowhere. And that's one of the things I think that has been perhaps the most stressful.
Say you had a close call with a mortar, that adrenaline is still going at a higher rate.
The combat stress team holds clinics and classes to teach soldiers how to recognize dangerous stress and what to do about it.
We've had people here in Victory who have had serious problems. They've gone up and done some crazy things, like shooting up the base. Combat stress, he was stressed out. Nobody noticed it. He just got his rifle, started shooting up the base.
In a situation where soldiers are constantly facing the unpredictable, they're taught simple techniques to maintain some kind of control.
In a situation like that, you know, someone may be able to find a sense of calm and peacefulness by, say, cleaning their weapon every night, even if it doesn't need to be cleaned. And they, you know, for that moment, and you tell them, for this moment, I want the entire world to be shrunk down to your weapon.
The Army says it's learned from bitter experience to treat combat stress before it becomes a permanent disability. After Vietnam, a very high percentage of soldiers and Marines came back with a lot of stress and a lot of what we afterwards learned was post-traumatic stress disorder. How is the military dealing now with that?
We had, since Vietnam, to basically study the phenomenon of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Go!
People with PTSD tend to have a hard time in life. There's a higher rate of divorce, a higher rate of unemployment, substance dependence like alcohol or what have you, panic disorder, depression. So it really is a disabling thing that once it develops, it's hard to recover from.
This is where soldiers can go if they need more help recovering. The Combat Stress Team's Restoration Clinic in Baghdad. They can get confidential therapy and the latest antidepressant medications. After a few days' rest, the Army says more than 95% have been sent back to combat. Clearly, the idea is to get as many of the fighting men back to the front to keep fighting. Some would say that to send a psychologically damaged person back to the area that wounded him in the first place is not good for him.
Data would show that when you don't send folks back to face their demons, to overcome this and master this, they tend to do worse in the long run. It's the folks who go back that actually do better. We'll tell soldiers, you need to go back to duty, because if you go home, this is something that you'll be struggling with, maybe struggling with for a very long time.
Sergeant Christopher Turnbull is an ex-sniper who's been fighting America's wars for the last 15 years, and he's as tough as they come. But now he's a convert to the combat stress program.
I believe it's a good program. I think it's a great program, to be honest with you. I think soldiers right now are afraid to use it because they think they're going to get, called, oh, you're a wimp.
What is the stigma, and does it still exist?
Back in the older days when I was in the Army, you didn't want to be one of those ones to go up and say, I've got a problem. It was better to beat up a soldier than it was to fix a soldier, you know what I mean?
Turnbull is now the seasoned leader of a platoon of young soldiers who had a very dangerous mission, choking off insurgent escape routes from Fallujah at the height of the American offensive. What stresses you out the most?
My biggest fear, I know that's their biggest fear, is getting on the roads, because you just don't know what's going to happen out there. Every time they get behind the wheel of a vehicle, up in the gun or seat, they have butterflies.
What these young men and women saw in one day's drive may haunt them forever. Their convoy was hit by a suicide car bomber, and 3 friends were medevaced with severe burns.
The major shock was watching one of my soldiers run from the vehicle with his safety jacket on fire. And this voice screaming in my head, I want to go home, this is not fair, we should all go home together.
What did you do afterwards? Did you seek any help?
It wasn't till I actually had a quiet moment that I realized that I was falling to pieces inside.
That's when Turnbull's platoon got combat stress counseling.
I've learned throughout the years that compassion is the best way to talk to a soldier. When the incident occurred, I was angry. I was mad because those are my soldiers. Those are guys that mean a lot to me. Good friends. So it can be hard. Excuse me.
It's okay.
So I pulled them all together and we talked, let it out, let them know that it wasn't their fault. And that's kind of the way I dealt with it.